I've never liked fluorescent lights. They hum, they flicker, they make you feel smaller than you already do, especially when you're the youngest systems analyst in a government department filled with people who think cloud means weather. My name's Lee Morgan, and for 5 years, I gave everything I had to the Department of Public Infrastructure Systems, the kind of place where technology went to die and egos went to live forever. When I first walked into that office, I thought I could make a difference. I was wrong, because in this department, truth didn't matter, titles did. Don't overthink it, Lee. We've been doing this for years. That was Evan Pierce, my coworker, tall, confident, charming in a self-satisfied way. The kind of guy who made people laugh at meetings even when he was dead wrong. He was also the reason my name became a warning. Don't be a Lee. The first time I realized how deep the rot went, we were in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. The servers had been throwing memory leaks for days, subtle, silent, dangerous. I'd traced the issue to an outdated security patch that hadn't been applied since before I joined. Evan, this codebase isn't stable, I said, showing him the diagnostics. If the patch fails during a live update. He didn't even look up from his phone. Relax, Morgan. It's government software, not NASA. We're not flying rockets here. But we're handling citizen infrastructure data. If the registry interface crashes. He smirked. Then we'll reboot it. That's what it's for, right? Everyone in the room laughed, except me. That day, I learned 2 things. 1, ego can be louder than logic. 2, when you're the only one who sees the fire, people will call you crazy until they smell the smoke. The department wasn't evil, just ancient. Layers of bureaucracy like old paint, every decision buried under forms and protocols. If something broke, they didn't fix it, they documented it. Evan was the golden boy, not because he was brilliant, but because he knew how to look brilliant. He had a joke for every glitch, a shortcut for every procedure. When things went right, he took the credit. When they went wrong, he smiled and said, "Ask Lee, she's the expert." That was his favorite trap, the kind that made you responsible for problems you'd warned everyone about. It started small, an anomaly in the Citizen Services database. Random ID mismatches, duplicate records, strange latencies during peak hours. I ran the logs 3 times before I was sure. The data integrity protocols were failing. At the next team briefing, I showed my findings. I know it looks stable, I said, but this is a cascade risk. If the backup nodes fail during synchronization, the entire registry could crash. We could lose access to every linked service, IDs, benefits, records. Evan interrupted with a laugh. You're predicting an apocalypse over a few log errors. A few people chuckled nervously. My supervisor, Mr. Delaney, leaned back, adjusting his glasses. Lee, we appreciate your diligence, but we have an audit next month. Let's not start unnecessary panic. Unnecessary panic. That phrase echoed in my head like a curse. After that meeting, people stopped making eye contact with me, lunch tables shifted. Emails got shorter, my workload doubled. When I spoke, people smiled politely and changed the subject. Evan started copying me on fewer emails. Once, I found out he'd presented my risk report to the regional board after deleting my name from it. I didn't confront him, not yet, because part of me thought maybe, just maybe, I could still save the system before it fell apart. That was the sentence that broke me. It was 9:17 p.m., and I was still in the office, staring at a terminal full of red warnings. I'd stayed late for weeks, trying to patch around the core bug. Evan strolled in with his jacket slung over his shoulder, about to leave for the night. Still playing hero, he teased. I didn't look up. I'm not playing. The patch failed again. He shrugged. Then roll back, it's not that deep. Evan, I said quietly, we're one failed sync away from a national outage. He turned, smirking. You're too emotional about this stuff, Lee. You take it personally. It's just a job. No, I said, meeting his eyes. It's people's lives. He laughed. And you think the minister cares about your logs. Then he left. And that was the night I decided to save every piece of evidence, every email, every ignored warning, every timestamp. Because I had a feeling one day I'd need them. For months, nothing happened, which, in IT terms, meant everything was about to happen. The department was celebrating the launch of their new digital platform, Government 2. Evan was on stage, giving interviews, shaking hands, smiling like a celebrity. I watched from the back of the auditorium, my stomach in knots. I knew what code was running under that platform. I knew how fragile it was. I wanted to believe maybe I was wrong. Maybe it would hold. But systems don't care about hope. They care about logic. And logic always wins. It happened on a Monday morning, always Monday. I was at home, halfway through my coffee, when my phone lit up with notifications. Urgent, registry system offline, all regions affected. I froze. Within minutes, the country's central citizen database, the backbone of public services, was inaccessible. Hospitals couldn't verify patient IDs. Government offices couldn't process payments. Airports couldn't check identity documents. Everything was tied to that one system, and that system was down. The crash had come, exactly as I'd warned. And the people who called me too emotional were now sending desperate emails with subject lines like, "Urgent, Lee, can you take a look? Need your expertise ASAP. Please respond." By noon, I had 12 missed calls. By 3 p.m., one from Mr. Delaney himself. His voice shook. "Lee, we need your help. The backups aren't loading. We've tried everything." I said nothing. He continued, "Evan told us you might still have access to the old scripts. Please just come in. We can fix this together." Fix this together. Funny how together suddenly mattered when the system went dark. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy that moment. The silence on the other end of the line, the tremor in his voice. Part of me wanted to say, "I told you so." Another part wanted to watch it burn. But a third part, the one that still cared about the integrity of what we'd built, whispered, "You can't let innocent people suffer because of them." So I took a deep breath and said, "I'll come in, but on one condition." He hesitated. "Anything." "I want full access, no interference, no committee approvals, and I want every decision logged in my name." He swallowed hard. "Done." When I walked into the office the next morning, it was chaos. Screens flickering, phones ringing. People shouting over each other. The confident hum of bureaucracy had turned into the static of panic. Evan looked like a ghost. His tie was loose, his eyes hollow. When he saw me, he froze. "Lee," he said softly, like my name was a prayer. I didn't respond. I just walked past him, straight to the server terminal. He followed, stammering. "Look, I didn't mean to." "Save it," I said. "We have 30 million records at risk. I don't have time for your guilt." The room fell silent. For the first time in months, I was the one giving orders. Hours blurred into minutes. I traced the issue, a corrupted node during live synchronization. The security patch that Evan had skipped had finally failed, cascading through every dependency. Piece by piece, I rebuilt the data schema, rerouted the backup, and initiated a manual recovery. At 2:43 a.m., the system flickered. At 2:44, it stabilized. At 2:45, the registry came back online. Applause broke out across the room. Some people even cheered. Evan just stared at me, pale, speechless. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just said quietly, "Next time someone warns you about a crash, listen." But that wasn't the end, because I wasn't done. They begged me to come back. Now they'd learn what it meant to ignore the one person who saw the truth. When the system came back online, the entire department treated it like a miracle. But I knew it wasn't a miracle. It was math, logic, and the one woman they'd dismissed. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the server room, sitting cross-legged on the cold tile floor, watching the diagnostics scroll across the screen. Each green checkmark felt like vindication, quiet, uncelebrated, and overdue. The next morning, they brought coffee and muffins. Government people loved celebrations when someone else cleaned up their mess. "Lee, you really saved us," Mr. Delaney said, his voice all honey and damage control. "Saved you," I corrected quietly. He blinked. "Excuse me." I smiled politely. The system didn't fail because of me. It failed because no one listened when I said it would. He gave that managerial laugh, the one that says, "Let's not make this personal." But this time, it was personal. By noon, the minister himself had issued a statement to the press, something bland, bureaucratic. Due to a temporary systems disruption, services were briefly unavailable. Operations have since been restored by our capable technical team. No names. No mention of the woman who had rebuilt the system from scratch at 2:43 a.m. But I wasn't expecting gratitude. Gratitude was cheap. What I wanted was accountability. So while they gave interviews and took credit, I started collecting proof. Every email, every log entry, every internal memo I'd archived from the months before the crash. I compiled it all into one encrypted folder labeled Audit Package. Because I knew the audit was coming, and when it did, I was going to make sure they saw everything. He cornered me 2 days later in the hallway. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair messy, tie wrinkled, guilt hanging on him like a wet coat. "Lee, can we talk?" I kept walking. "Please," he said, grabbing my arm. "I need to apologize." I stopped. For which part? Ignoring me, taking my reports, calling me emotional, or pretending you knew how to fix what I warned you about? His jaw tightened. I was wrong. "That's a start." "I didn't think it was that serious," he said, voice cracking. "I thought you just overreacted." I looked at him for a long second. "That's the problem, Evan. You never think, you assume." He swallowed hard. "Is there anything I can do to make it right?" "Yes," I said. "Tell the truth." A week later, it came. The official notice, National Data Oversight Committee, post-incident audit. The email went out at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Everyone pretended to be calm, but the air changed. You could taste the fear in the room. The committee would send external investigators to review every decision leading to the crash. Every log, every update, every sign that someone had ignored internal warnings. For once, I didn't have to say a word. The system and the evidence would speak for me. Government buildings have 2 types of networks, the one with wires and passwords and the one made of whispers. By the second day of the audit, people were whispering my name again, but this time not as a joke. "She warned them. She's the one who fixed it. She's got the logs." Evan avoided my eyes in meetings. Delaney started copying me on everything. And for the first time since I joined, when I spoke, people actually listened. They arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 auditors in dark suits, carrying clipboards and calm authority. The lead auditor, Ms. Tran, introduced herself with a polite smile. "We're here to understand the timeline of events leading to the registry outage. We'll need your full cooperation." Delaney's smile twitched. "Of course, total transparency." Ms. Tran turned to me. "Ms. Morgan, I understand you were the primary recovery lead." I nodded. "Yes, and the first to identify the system risk 6 months prior." The room went silent. Evan shifted in his chair. Delaney cleared his throat. "We, took her warnings into consideration, but—" Ms. Tran raised a hand. "We'll review that in the documentation." And then her eyes met mine, calm, curious, knowing. I could tell she already suspected the truth. When it was my turn to present my findings, I didn't dramatize. I didn't accuse. I just showed evidence. Slide after slide of timestamps, email chains, and code logs. Every ignored alert, every dismissed warning. "Here," I said, pointing to one thread, "I submitted a patch request on March 8th. It was declined as non-urgent by Mr. Pierce." Evan stared at his hands. On April 2nd, I reported an error propagation during the backup cycle. The issue was marked, closed without action. Delaney coughed. Those were resource management decisions. I turned to the auditors. They were decisions that led to a national outage. Silence. The kind that feels heavy, like air before a storm. Ms. Tran clicked her pen. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. You've been very thorough. The audit report took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of tension, rumors, and half-smiles in the break room. When it finally landed, it hit like a thunderclap. The committee's findings were explicit. Systemic negligence and failure to act upon documented risk assessments directly led to the registry crash. 2 managers were suspended. Evan was demoted. Delaney was quietly reassigned, pending review. And my name, for the first time, was written in black ink in an official report, under Incident Recovery Lead, Ms. Lee Morgan. But that wasn't the revenge. That was only the beginning. 2 days after the audit results, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ms. Morgan, this is the minister's office. The deputy minister would like to meet you personally to discuss your future with the department. My future, the irony almost made me laugh. They'd spent months treating me like a nuisance. Now I was suddenly valuable. I said yes, of course, but not because I wanted a promotion. I wanted perspective. I wanted to see how far the hypocrisy went. The office was enormous, more like a museum than a workplace. Walls lined with plaques and awards, windows overlooking the city skyline. The deputy minister, Madeline Shaw, stood to greet me. Sharp suit, silver hair, eyes that missed nothing. Ms. Morgan, she said, shaking my hand, you've had quite a month. I suppose so. I've read the audit, she continued. You showed remarkable composure under pressure. We'd like to consider you for a new role, Senior Systems Advisor. I raised an eyebrow. That's quite a leap. She smiled faintly. You earned it, and frankly, we need people who aren't afraid to tell the truth, even when it's unpopular. I studied her face. You mean people you can later blame when it goes wrong. Her smile didn't falter. I prefer to think of it as accountability. I didn't trust her, but I took the offer. Because there's one thing I've learned in government. The higher you are, the clearer the view of who's pulling the strings. When I returned to the department, the atmosphere had changed. Evan barely looked at me. When he did, it was with quiet shame. Delaney's office was empty. And suddenly every meeting started with, Lee, what do you think? It was almost funny. The same people who'd rolled their eyes at my reports now hung on my every word. But power is a dangerous thing, and I wasn't there to enjoy it. I was there to use it. 2 months into my new role, I found something strange. While cleaning up legacy servers, I stumbled across a hidden directory labeled Archive Beta. Inside were logs, old, encrypted, but time-stamped around the same period as the crash. When I decrypted one, my blood ran cold. It contained emails between Delaney and a private contractor, discussing cost cuts and skipped maintenance updates to save budget for optics. In short, they knew. They knew the system was unstable and still went live to meet political deadlines. And I realized the crash wasn't just negligence, it was cover-up. I could have deleted the files. I could have pretended I never saw them. But that's not who I am. So I saved everything to a secure drive, a digital grenade, waiting for the right moment to detonate. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, because I wanted to see who else was involved. And it didn't take long before I saw Evan's name appear in those chains too, forwarded messages, attachments, approvals. He hadn't just ignored my warnings, he'd helped bury them. I found him one evening, alone in the server room, staring at a flickering monitor. Evan, I said quietly. He jumped. Lee, you scared me. Seems like I keep doing that. He tried to smile. You heard about my demotion, I guess. I did. He rubbed his face. I deserved it. Yes, I said, you did, but that's not why I'm here. He looked up wary. Then why? I slid a folder across the table, printed copies of the contractor emails. Recognize these. His face drained of color. Where did you get that? Doesn't matter. What matters is that this proves you and Delaney knew the risks and hid them. He stammered. It wasn't my call. You approved the cost cuts, I interrupted. You forwarded the reports. He sank into his chair. You don't understand, Lee. We were told to make it work. The minister wanted results before the election. So you gambled with the country's data. He looked at me, eyes pleading. Please, don't expose this. I'll lose everything. I leaned closer. You already did. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because of guilt, but because of clarity. For months, I'd been fighting for recognition, for respect, but what I really wanted was truth. And truth, in the right hands, was power. So I started planning. If they wanted to play politics, fine. I'd give them a show they'd never forget, one built not on rumors or revenge fantasies, but on facts. Cold, undeniable, time-stamped truth. Because in a world full of manipulation, the purest revenge is exposure. 2 weeks later, Parliament called for a public hearing on government IT resilience. A televised session, the kind where ministers make speeches and hope no one asks real questions. I knew that was my moment. The deputy minister asked me to join the delegation, to show transparency and technical confidence. I said yes. And on the morning of the hearing, I slipped the files onto an encrypted USB drive, tucked it into my blazer pocket, and walked into the chamber like a soldier walking onto a battlefield. Halfway through the hearing, a senator asked the deputy minister about the system crash. She gave a rehearsed answer, unforeseen technical complications, swiftly resolved. Then she turned to me. Ms. Morgan, would you like to elaborate? I met her gaze and smiled politely. Yes, I said, I would. I plugged in the USB drive. And one by one, I projected the internal emails, the budget cuts, the suppressed warnings, everything. The room went dead silent. The deputy minister's face went pale. This, I said evenly, is what actually caused the crash. Decisions made for political convenience, not public safety. A ripple of gasps swept through the chamber. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted for the live feed to be cut. But it was too late. The truth was out. By evening, the headlines were everywhere. Whistleblower exposes government negligence behind registry crash. Lee Morgan reveals internal cover-up. Within 24 hours, the deputy minister resigned. Delaney's reassignment turned into termination, and Evan disappeared from the department altogether. I didn't feel triumphant, just quiet, still. Because revenge, when it's real, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, the kind that follows when lies finally stop echoing. A month later, I got another call, this time from the National Data Security Agency. They wanted me to head a new initiative on ethical systems governance. A clean slate, a bigger stage, and most importantly, authority. I said yes. But before I left, I stopped by the old office one last time. The place looked smaller somehow. Evan's desk was empty. Delaney's nameplate was gone. And for the first time, I turned off the fluorescent lights myself. Before walking out, I left a note on Evan's old desk. It said, "Next time someone warns you about the crash, listen." Then I smiled, turned off the lights, and walked into the daylight. When the news broke, everyone wanted to talk about courage. They called me the woman who stood up to the system. They didn't talk about the fear, the sleepless nights, or the weight that comes when you become the story. Because whistleblowing isn't victory, it's exposure. And once you're exposed, there's no going back to anonymity. The National Data Security Agency headquarters looked nothing like the old department, glass walls, clean code, people who actually listened. My badge read, Lee Morgan, Director, Ethical Systems Governance. Every time I scanned it through security, a small part of me still expected someone to stop me and say, "Wait, are you sure you belong here?" But I did. It earned this. Still, power brings its own kind of loneliness. People respected me now, but they didn't trust easily. Some saw me as a hero, others as a warning. Don't cross her or she'll burn the place down. And maybe, in a way, they were both right. It arrived 2 weeks into the job, plain envelope, no return address. Inside, one line. Truth cuts both ways. No signature. I didn't tell security. I just slid it into a drawer and told myself not to care. But at night, I kept replaying those words. Truth cuts both ways. What if I destroyed lives that didn't deserve it? What if exposing them also exposed me? My motives, my anger, my satisfaction at seeing them fall. Because revenge, even righteous revenge, always leaves a residue. One evening, I was reviewing a new security model when I noticed something odd in the network logs. An access attempt, unauthorized, internal. Someone was pinging the old registry servers. I traced the origin. It came from a decommissioned account. E. Pierce. Evan. My pulse quickened. He was gone, supposedly fired, vanished from every database. So how was his account still alive? I initiated a deep trace. Packets looping through hidden proxies, bouncing between government routers. This wasn't a random intrusion. It was deliberate, precise. And it was coming from inside the Capitol network. The next morning, I asked for a meeting with internal cyber ops. Someone's re-entering legacy systems using a dead account, I said. The analyst frowned. You think it's him. I think it's someone using him. We launched an internal sweep. Within hours, we discovered fragments of code, small, almost invisible, left behind in the old infrastructure. A backdoor. It didn't just allow access. It allowed manipulation of audit logs. Anyone using it could erase their tracks, rewrite timelines, alter blame. And it had been written 6 months before the crash. I sat back, heart pounding. That meant the entire catastrophe, the failure, the cover-up, might have been engineered, not accidental. But by whom? That night, my phone rang from a blocked number. Leah. I knew that voice, Evan. My throat tightened. You shouldn't be calling me. I know, but you need to stop digging. I froze. So it is you. No, he said quickly. Not like you think I didn't build the back door. I static crackled. Then, they'll come after both of us if you make it public. Who's they? Click. The line went dead. The next morning, the agency's head of operations called me in. Someone tried to breach your work terminal last night, he said. We traced it to an off-grid node. Someone's using insider credentials. I said nothing. He studied me. Lee, this might be connected to your previous department. Do you want us to pull old staff for questioning? I hesitated. If Evan was telling the truth, someone above Delaney had orchestrated everything. But if I exposed that too soon, they'd bury it and me with it. Not yet, I said. Let me verify something first. I still had the encrypted copy of Archive Beta, the one I'd used to take them down. Buried deep in that directory were fragments of server scripts, mostly junk. But now, one string caught my eye. Init Khan, MP Shaw Project Rubicon. MP Shaw, Madeline Shaw, the former deputy minister. My stomach dropped. She hadn't just covered up negligence. She commissioned the backdoor. And if Evan was trying to warn me, then someone wanted those logs gone before I found this. That night, I stayed late in the agency lab, backing up the files onto an isolated drive. At 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor beeped. I wasn't alone. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, then the door creaked open. Leah. It was Ms. Tran, the lead auditor from the investigation months ago. Relief, then confusion. What are you doing here? She closed the door quietly. Following a hunch, I think you found something you shouldn't have. What do you mean? She set a file on the desk, red-stamped confidential. Inside were memos tying Madeline Shaw to multiple cost containment initiatives across departments. Each ended in quiet system failures. She's been using selective outages to justify private contracts, Tran said softly. The crash you exposed cost millions, and someone made sure those funds were redirected. My chest tightened. You knew. I suspected, but your whistleblowing made her sloppy. I stared at her. Why tell me now? Because she's back. The next morning's headline hit like a gut punch. Former Deputy Minister Madeline Shaw, appointed as consultant for national data security reform. She was coming back, under a new title and under my agency. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. The system always reabsorbs its monsters. But not this time. They called a board session to introduce the consultant. Shaw entered the room like she owned it, calm, polished, eyes like frost. "Lee," she said warmly, "congratulations on your new role." "Madeline." She smiled. "I hope there are no hard feelings. Politics can be messy." I met her gaze. "Messy, you nearly crashed the nation's infrastructure." Her smile didn't waver. "And you fixed it. We both did our jobs." Everyone chuckled awkwardly. She'd already started rewriting history in real time. But I had something she didn't know. Evidence she'd buried twice, and that I'd now uncovered again. That night, Ms. Tran called me again. "If you release this, you'll destroy her," she said. "But you'll also destroy the agency's credibility, maybe even yours." I looked at the monitor, Shaw's encrypted memos glowing like ghosts. I could leak them anonymously, or I could face her in the open. Anonymous meant safety, open meant justice. And after everything, I couldn't choose safety. The next board meeting was set for Friday, live-streamed for transparency. Perfect. I spent the next 3 nights building a presentation titled Legacy Security Risks. Inside it, the full trail from Archive Beta to Project Rubicon. On Friday, as cameras rolled, Shaw began her usual speech about integrity and innovation. When she finished, I stood. "With respect," I said, "I'd like to show the committee something." I inserted the drive. The first slide appeared, timestamps, signatures, budget transfers. Shaw's eyes widened. She whispered, "What are you doing?" "Finishing what I started." The next slide displayed her authorization code beside the hidden backdoor. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Security moved forward. But I kept talking, calm, precise. Every detail verifiable. Shaw tried to interrupt. "These documents are classified." "Then why were they used to sabotage a national system?" I said. And in that moment, every light in the room felt like sunlight breaking through the fog of years of silence. The fallout was nuclear. Shaw was arrested for corruption and data fraud. Investigators traced millions in redirected contracts. The agency survived, bruised but cleaner. And I was cleared again, though this time they called it extraordinary transparency. But I wasn't celebrating, because I'd learned something dangerous. The system doesn't crumble from lies, it crumbles from silence. Weeks later, an email arrived from an unknown address, subject, "You did it." The body contained one line. "Now let it go." No signature, but I knew it was him. I stared at the screen for a long time, then I deleted it. Because letting go wasn't forgetting, it was freeing myself from the loop. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the hum of those old fluorescent lights in my head. They remind me where I came from, that small cubicle, that ignored voice. Now, every system I build starts with one rule: listen to the quiet warnings. Because somewhere, in some room, another Lee is trying to be heard, and I owe her that. There's something no one tells you about being right. It's lonely. After the headlines faded and the investigators packed up, silence took over. No more late-night calls. No meetings. No adrenaline rush. Just me, my office, and the weight of everything that had happened. People think vindication feels like triumph. It doesn't. It feels like standing in the ruins victorious, but alone. They called it the Reformation period. New systems, new protocols, a new ethics-first mandate. I was at the center of it all, consulted, interviewed, quoted. Lee Morgan, the woman who changed the game. But the truth was quieter. Every article, every speech, every mention of my name came with whispers. The kind that start with "she's the one who," and end in either admiration or fear. I became a symbol, not a person. And symbols can't afford mistakes. It was raining that morning, the kind of steady rain that turns everything gray. I was reviewing a new security proposal when my assistant buzzed in. "There's someone here to see you. No appointment." "Who?" She says she used to work with you, Evan Pierce's sister. I froze, sent her in. A woman stepped in, early 40s, with Evan's same sharp eyes. She carried a manila envelope and grief that had settled into her shoulders. I'm Mia, she said, Evan's sister. I gestured for her to sit. I don't know what you've been told, she began softly, but my brother, he's gone. My breath caught, gone. He took his own life 2 weeks ago. The words hit like static in my ears. She set the envelope on the desk. He left this for you. I stared at it, hands trembling. Why? He said you'd understand. After she left, I sat there staring at that envelope for nearly an hour. When I finally opened it, I found a letter and a flash drive. The letter was handwritten, shaky but clear. Lee, I wasn't innocent. I helped build Rubicon, but I didn't know what Shaw planned to do with it. I thought it was for predictive risk modeling, not sabotage. When the crash happened, she told me to keep quiet. Said it was temporary, that no one would get hurt. I didn't believe her. But I didn't stop her either. You were right to expose it, and me. I deserved what I got. But you need to know, some of what happened after wasn't her doing. It came from higher. You were never supposed to find the back door. Don't chase the rest. You've done enough. Evan. I plugged in the flash drive. Inside, one encrypted folder. I hesitated, then opened it. Thousands of system logs, not from the crash, from before it. They showed test runs of Rubicon months prior, using data from multiple government departments. Meaning, Shaw wasn't just one bad actor, it had been part of a sanctioned project. I sat back, feeling my pulse in my throat. If I released this, it wouldn't just expose one corrupt official, it would bring down half the administration. For days, I couldn't think straight. The old fire inside me, that need for truth, for justice, started burning again. But this time, there was another voice. Evan, you've done enough. I replayed it in my mind until it haunted me. What if this wasn't about truth anymore? What if it had become about me? Because every step I took up that ladder, every exposure, every fight had turned me from a whistleblower into a weapon, and weapons don't get peace. The media still called occasionally, hungry for exclusives. When one journalist asked if I planned to write a memoir, I said no. But the question lingered. If I didn't tell the story, someone else would, someone who didn't know the cost. So I started writing, not for the public, not for revenge, but for myself. Late at night, in the quiet hum of my apartment, I began typing. They ignored my warnings about the system crash. Then they begged me to come back. But the truth is, I never really left. Each page became therapy. Each memory, a wound reopened and cleaned. Months later, they held a national recognition ceremony. I was being awarded the Merit for Civil Integrity, the highest honor given to a government civilian. When my name was announced, I stood before hundreds of officials, cameras flashing. The minister spoke warmly about courage and reform, but all I could think about was how many of them had stayed silent when it mattered. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the crowd and said, we build systems to protect people, but systems fail not because of bad code, but because of quiet rooms where truth goes unheard. I don't want this award to remind us of what went right. I want it to remind us of what almost went wrong. The room fell silent. Some looked uncomfortable. Good. Afterward, reporters tried to get sound bites, but I left quietly, slipping into the rain outside. 2 days later, as I was locking my office, someone called my name. Leah. I turned. It was Madeline Shaw, pale, thinner, but unmistakably herself. She was out on bail, pending appeal. You shouldn't be here, I said. I needed to see you. I crossed my arms. Why? To understand why you did it. You already had your promotion, your spotlight. Why not just walk away? I studied her, the woman who'd nearly ruined everything. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just sadness. Because truth doesn't belong to one person, I said. It belongs to everyone it touches. She scoffed softly. Do you really believe that? I have to. She stared at me a long time, then said quietly, you remind me of who I was before I stopped caring. Then she turned and walked away. Later that night, I opened Evan's files again, one last time. There was one hidden folder I hadn't noticed before. For Leah. Inside was a video. Evan sat in a dark room, face drawn, eyes red. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it out. Don't let them turn you into me. Don't let the fight become your identity. You're more than the crash. Promise me that. I paused the video and felt tears burning behind my eyes, because he was right. Somewhere along the way, I had become the crash. Every choice, every victory, every scar, all orbiting that one defining event. It was time to let it go. The next morning, I made a decision. I encrypted Evan's files again, this time permanently. Then I placed them in a sealed archive labeled, "Do not restore." Not out of fear, but closure. I'd exposed what needed to be exposed. The rest wasn't mine to carry. I submitted my resignation that afternoon. They were stunned. "You can't leave now, you're the face of reform." I said gently. But reform doesn't need a face, it needs followers. A few months later, I bought a small property outside the city, quiet, green, surrounded by vineyards. I set up a little home office overlooking the hills, no servers, no politics, just the sound of wind and leaves. Sometimes people wrote to me, young engineers, civil servants, interns. They wanted advice. How do you know when to speak up? They ask. And I'd always answer. When staying silent feels like betrayal. That became my mantra. One evening, I saw a news headline scroll across my phone. Whistleblower program, reforms expand nationwide. They were calling it the Morgan Directive. I laughed, a quiet, disbelieving laugh. I hadn't asked for that, but maybe in some way it was the world's way of saying thank you. Before I shut down my old government email for good, I wrote one last message, to no one and everyone. To whoever finds this account, remember that silence protects systems, not people. And when your warning goes ignored, keep records, keep your dignity, and keep believing that truth matters. Because one day they'll come back, and when they do, make sure you're the one holding the password. Then I hit send, not to a name, but to the public inbox, a message in a bottle to the next generation. A year later, I received a postcard with no return address, just 5 words written in block letters. They heard me this time, L. I smiled. Somewhere another voice had finally been heard. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the headlines, not the justice, not the revenge, but the echo of courage passed on quietly, system to system, soul to soul.